Over the years, the House of Lords has had a key role in shaping housing policy. Crossbench peer Lord Best has been one of the leading figures in housing for the last 40 years, and he made a major contribution to the Corrymeela Conference in 1974. I met him in Westminster to discuss his reflections on the emergence of housing associations here. And I started by asking him how the housing association movement in England was developing at that time.
Well, 74 was the big year. This was the Housing Act 1974, picked up by Labour, who just got in. It had been invented by the Conservatives, but Labour were not opposing it, taken on by Labour, and suddenly all the doors opened. The Housing Corporation, what is now the Homes and Communities Agency, this was given really big money. And the housing, they'd been okay. They were still a jumbly bunch of all sorts, big old ones like Peabody, Guinness, Rowntree, and lots of newcomers who regarded themselves as very radical and very on the street. That lot all were jumbled together in the Federation, and suddenly they had the money all to expand and grow. This was a reaction to the bad old days of council house building, tower blocks, concrete estates, soulless, all those kind of adjectives, and a few disasters. Rowan Point had blown up with the gas problems. So council housing was in it was heading for the doldrums. Still a big pipeline to be built out, but heading for the doldrums. And governments of all persuasions had decided, let's give these other guys a chance. So we got the serious money in 1974 to really get out there, mostly buying houses from the Rackman landlords that were around at that time, and doing them up, modernising, improving them, rather than new build, but quite a bit of new build too. Away we went. And then at Corrymeela, I discovered, not surprisingly, but in Northern Ireland, news had not yet arrived that this sector had places to go, that it was going to really take off. And so we got together at that point. It was the Troubles. This was bad times, and people were pretty depressed, and there was a lot of division in the ranks. But people began to see, maybe if we get the kind of resources that they get over there, things could take off here too, and this could make a really significant difference.
And how did you end up speaking at the conference?
The National Federation, it started off being called the National Federation of Housing Societies when I arrived in 1973. That's what it was called. I changed the name to the National Federation of Housing Associations because societies it meant something slightly different. But the National Federation of Housing Societies, still that in 74, that covered Northern Ireland too. So the housing associations over there were members of my federation. We hadn't yet gone for independence for Northern Ireland, devolution, which followed actually only a year later. I went over and negotiated a deal with the government, with the executive in Northern Ireland. It was the Whitehall government, of course, at Stormont. A minister called John Concannon, the minister at the time. And then we got the independence for the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations. The rest is history, of course it is, Carol.
I believe it wasn't the easiest of journeys getting from London over to Corrymeela.
No, I mean, even getting out of the airport, I remember the tanks, the barricades. It felt very strange. We were kind of insulated in the rest of the UK from all the things that were going on. When I went up to Stormont to see John Concannon, they checked my passport 3 times, up, down, over the hills, up to Stormont. And it felt really foreign and really different and really difficult. But my meeting with the minister was unique in my experience, because when I told him that we needed, I can't remember the numbers, say 80,000 to set up a proper office and have a federation in Northern Ireland, he said, no, that's no good at all. No, 80,000. He said, you'll need at least twice that. The only time a minister's ever said that to me. But that was Northern Ireland at the time. People were looking for solutions, and people had the idea, maybe these housing associations, maybe there's something in this. Let's go for it. And he did. He helped us get established.
What was your message to those gathered at Corrymeela?
My message was kind of, don't get all depressed, because this could be a really big moment of opportunity. Let's go for it. Housing such a critical aspect of life for so many people, not just the roof over your head, but the whole experience of being in a community, doing things together. This was such an opportunity to make things better in Northern Ireland. Let's go for it. And indeed, a number of associations have and will. That was the outcome.
What are your recollections of the participants and the discussions at the event?
I remember Peter McLaughlin, who was very central to all of this. Paddy Doherty was the great character. I'd never met a Paddy Doherty before, so this was an education in itself, and he was terrific. And there was this sense that people came from communities and were part of communities and were doing things for and with their own communities. And that was a kind of different flavour to the feeling in the rest of the UK. We liked to think that we were kind of doing things with the people, but it was a middle-class operation that was operating on behalf of the communities in the rest of the UK. There you felt it was the communities themselves standing up for the things that they needed. And that sense you don't want to lose that. That was a really important feeling. There's a lot of downsides of having strong community feelings, but there's some upsides too, and playing into that strength, that's important.
Following the Corrymeela conference, how did the National Federation of Housing Associations support the development of the movement in Northern Ireland?
We appointed Mike Wright, Colonel Mike Wright, an extraordinary appointment in many ways, an army colonel, to run this charitable aspect to the Federation. And he had served in Northern Ireland, and he took a big interest in Northern Ireland. He was at Corrymeela. And he then was the support framework within the National Federation in London, across to Belfast. And he went backwards and forwards a lot and did a hell of a lot of good work. But of course, we had to appoint a chief executive, director. We were all called directors in those days. And we found Erskine Holmes, who again was a unique character, quite different from other people, and with affiliations to all parties in Northern Ireland, and his own man to the hilt. He'd been responsible for helping the Northern Ireland vote for us going into Europe rather than staying on the outside. The yes vote he was very much in favour of, and he'd campaigned. He was a campaigner. And Erskine, of course, was a triumph, and we put him into place and wound him up, and away he went.
How would you summarise the progress of housing associations across the UK over the last 40 years? And where do you think we need to go from here?
Well, over the last 40 years, that's a long time. It's had various aspects to that. We started off using government money, big grants, 90% grants, and even a revenue deficit grant in case there was still a deficit after getting a 90% grant. We had the money, we expanded. A lot of it was the street property acquisitions and the new build too. That began to come on bigger time. There was that phase. We got into then adding in the transfer of stock from local authorities. This would be the equivalent, of course, of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive handing over stock to housing associations. But the housing associations, both newly created and the existing ones, they took on council housing big time. That doubled the size of the sector. And then we got into the phase in which consolidation, scale became vital. In order to get the cheap money, in order to get people to lend on favourable terms and feel secure about it, you needed to be big. And the housing associations have now consolidated, they've merged, amalgamated, loads of takeovers, and we now have huge enterprises, 90,000 homes, 80,000 homes. For the last 8 years I chaired Hanover Housing Association, 19,000 properties. Sounds quite a lot, 19,000 properties. No. This is not one of the big ones. This is a medium to smaller one at 19,000 properties. So the movement, as we used to call it, has become a sector, it's become an industry, it's become very large and businesslike. The great secret is to try to maintain the social purpose behind all of this. It wasn't just to make a profit. There aren't any shareholders to pay off. This did have a real meaning behind it. And in Northern Ireland, I think you have retained that sense of community, that sense of purpose, which is perhaps the most precious aspect of the whole operation. I'm not saying that we have lost it. in the rest of the UK, but it becomes a more difficult internal conflict to resolve, the business aspects, the commercial aspects versus doing the right thing, the social aspects, helping people at the bottom end of the scale. Is the next phase in the UK now that we go for the numbers? We go for the people who can afford to pay. We jack up the rents to the so-called affordable rent levels, which are getting on for the market levels, which is really an intermediate sector. We do lots of shared ownership, very important to do that. We get into housing for sale big time. Government puts a big tick in the box. These people are producing the volume, and with shortages as the underlying problem, not enough houses as the underlying problem. Government thinks this is great, do more, just keep going, build. But that is forgetting the fact that there's an awful lot of people on low incomes, low earnings, and no income, no earnings. And those people also, and they are the traditional territory for the housing association sector, they need homes too, and they can be forgotten and left out, and in fact damaged by things like the dreadful bedroom tax that we've given as much opposition to as we possibly can over here, and you have been spared in Northern Ireland. Long may that continue.
In more recent years, you've been over with Gráinne Long and the CIH running the Independent Commission on the Future of Housing. Are there particular areas you think Northern Ireland housing associations should be concentrating on in helping transform our society now?
Couple of things, I think. The shared futures, integrating communities. Perhaps the housing associations are the only agency that could pull that off. And that's terribly important. In 100 years' time, for sure, people will have all melded and merged, and peace will be not an unusual aspect of Northern Ireland. And getting there, I think the housing associations are part of the solution. It's an important element in what they're doing, what they're trying to do. So that was something absolutely not replicated in England, Scotland, Wales, but something important for the sector. The other thing is, I think, you have got a community base to all of the things that happen in Northern Ireland. Preserving that while needing to be bigger. Scale is important. Sadly, you need to be large nowadays to instill confidence in the lenders who can otherwise not lend at all or lend at high interest rates, and then the rents have to be higher and everything goes wrong, grants need to be higher. So being bigger is important. How do you manage to be bigger, to impress the lenders, the financial institutions, and yet retain that community base? And I think sticking together, doing things together, which the sector has managed to do. I felt that at Corrymeela, across all kinds of lines. People were wanting to do things together, borrowing money together today. The Federation, therefore, becomes an important part of this. The agency that holds the housing associations in one place, keeps everybody united and on side. That's really significant. Because you're fragmented and small in the great scheme of things, holding together becomes absolutely vital, and that's where the Federation have a really important role to play.